Hi guys, this is Joe and I'm giving my final analysis of the book The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. The Bell Jar is a novel about Esther Greenwood's decline in mental health. What's interesting to me about the book is that it's semi-autobiographical, where the character of Esther Greenwood reflects directly on the author Sylvia Plath and her depression. Also, Sylvia Plath committed suicide 1 year after the book was published, and she was only 30 years old, leaving her children behind. This book really gives a glimpse into insanity. You see the progress of Esther's disease and where she goes and what she thinks, and it's very relatable. You can understand, and any reader can sympathize with Esther's feelings. The protagonist of the novel is Esther Greenwood. The story is told from her perspective, which gives an in with her views and her opinion on everything. Esther is an overachiever, and she wins a writing contest in her junior year of college that allows her to go to New York City and work for Ladies' Day magazine with 11 other girls. And there she doesn't really feel special. And that's when her depression begins. On page 2 of the book, Esther states, "I was supposed to be having the time of my life. I was supposed to be the envy of thousands of other college girls just like me over America." The antagonist of the story is basically everybody. For example, Buddy Willard, a family friend of Esther's, is one of the main people who does not inspire Esther. She just hates him for everything. And on page 56 of the novel, Esther writes, "Now, lying on my back in bed, I imagine Buddy saying, 'Do you know what a poem is, Esther?' 'No, what?' I would say. 'A piece of dust.'" This shows Buddy's disrespect towards Esther and what she wants to be. And he says that once they're married and they have children, that she just will want to give up her writing career, and she totally disagrees with him. The next antagonist of the story is Dr. Gordon, Esther's first doctor or psychiatrist when she first develops the depression. Dr. Gordon, instead of listening to Esther and seeing how she's feeling, he tries to solve her depression quickly and painfully, in Esther's point of view, by giving her electroshock therapy. The main conflict of the Bell Jar is person versus society. In New York, Esther feels disconnected from her peers. She feels that she's alone and detached from everybody else. In her hometown, she's used to excelling and being the smartest person, but here in New York with 11 other girls who have the same capabilities as her, she doesn't feel as special as she did before. And as she says in the story, she's only good at winning things. Then she's just struggling with life in general and what she wants from life. She feels that she makes a reference to a fig tree where each fig represents a different option in life, and she can't grasp one, or else the others would fall. And lastly, she has feminist views, which is totally before her time, and nobody really respects that in the 1950s. The organization in the novel is used entirely by flashbacks and occurrences in the past that led up to Esther's current state. It really gives insight to the reader about Esther's feelings, and it helps the reader understand her experiences and how they contributed really towards the depression. In the novel, the strengths are made by the first person point of view, where it gives Esther's opinion on everything, and it shows her views instead of anybody else's. The only real uniqueness of the novel is that the flashbacks can sometimes get confusing and you don't know where Esther really is in the story. In the story, two examples of symbolism are the bell jar and mirrors. In the story, Esther thinks of the bell jar. She thinks she's being trapped under it. She can never get out. And she's used it in the book on page 185, where she says, "Wherever I sat, on the deck of a ship or a street cafe in Paris or Bangkok, I would be sitting under the same glass bell jar, stewing in my own sour air." And on page 186, when she said, "I sank back in the gray plush seat and closed my eyes. The air of the bell jar weighted around me and I couldn't stir." This shows how she's trapped inside the bell jar and she feels like she can never get out. Second, mirrors represent that she doesn't really see herself. She doesn't really see her image and what she's become until she sees the mirror in the hospital. So on page 174 in the book, it says, "At first I didn't see what the trouble was. It wasn't a mirror at all, but a picture. When the doctor gives her the mirror of her in the hospital, she doesn't think what she's seeing is her. Instead, just a picture of somebody else." The progression of the main character's illness in the novel starts when she is 9 years old, when her father dies. In New York City, it continues when she becomes very upset because of the Rosenberg trial and how they were executed. And she feels like that would be the most painful and disturbing thing that could ever happen. And she feels like her peers in New York are all the same as her, and she's not used to that because in her hometown she would always excel. And part of that was her mom being so negative because of her father's death, and she just partly blamed her mother for her depression. After that, when she's given treatment, she goes to the hospitals and she's given shock therapy, and she feels like the shock therapy is making it worse, and it's just painful, and it gets her more angry. Then after being sent to the private hospital by Philomena Guinea, she becomes friends with Dr. Nolan, and she finally feels comfortable getting shock treatments and being treated in general with OT and just being treated by her doctors. The mental health system back in the 1950s was much different than it is today. Back then, they did not know much about medicine and other treatments. They used lobotomies, shock treatments, insulin treatments, things that are uncommon today because they're devastating and painful. Now, we know more about medication and how group therapy is more important than shock therapy. And both Esther and Sylvia Plath would have had a greater chance of living in today's society with the mental treatments than they did back in her day. The different settings in the novel included New York City, Esther's mother's house or back at her home, and the hospitals that she lives in. In New York City, it's where it represents the prize of Esther's contest, but she really doesn't treat it like that. She believes that she doesn't fit in, and it's really the start to where she starts knowing that she doesn't fit in with everybody else, and she believes that she's like by herself. Now, when she gets home, this is where she really breaks down, and multiple times she tries to kill herself, and that's when they find her in the basement, overdose on pills. And when she starts getting treatments, she doesn't like Dr. Gordon because he forces things on her, but then when she goes to the private hospital, she likes Dr. Nolan, and she likes Belsize and that private hospital that Philomena Guinea brought her to, much more than Dr. Gordon's hospital because they treat her better and it's more secluded. Next, Plath was ahead of her time in the 1950s, and with her feminist view, she thought, well, society thought that men should marry women and women should be household workers. She wanted to be on her own. She wanted to be a poet, and she wanted to escape the family life. And also, she wanted all the figs on the tree, like every opportunity she can get. And most women in her age were not like that. They had one designated job that they wanted to do, and that was to be a family, somebody who worked in the home. I think that Esther was ready to leave the hospital by the end of the story. She realized that the bell jar, no matter what she did, would always be there, and she couldn't escape it, and it could come back at any time. But she knew she knew that she could overcome it, and she wanted to get better, and that was why she was ready to get out. And my overall opinion of the book was it was very a captivating novel, and it could be confusing at times and depressing at times. It really showed the progress of depression and how Esther made a miraculous recovery from her horrible state at the end of the story.